Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman here, as always, with Tom Orr. And Tom, we are back from Chicago, and it's a nice night or a nice day wherever you are, and it's just a good time to be podcasting, right?
When is it not a good time to be podcasting?
When you're driving,
in your opinion,
when you're flying a plane. When you're like if a doctor is giving birth to a child, maybe put the podcast on hold. I can keep going, Tom. I know you want to get out of here and get this podcast done quickly, but if you want to do a podcast about bad times and do a podcast, we can do that.
It's not really a good time to do a podcast about bad times to do a podcast.
See, you've proven your own. You've disproven your own point with your own point. So, good job. So we are back from Chicago. We did a recap of Media Days, a pretty hasty recap, and not that we're going to spend a whole bunch more time on that, but because next week, our next show will be, like if we drop it on Wednesday, as we always do, 2 days after that, fall camp begins. So, like, we got to start talking about camp next week, maybe do a camp preview, which I feel like every single show we've done since the Rose Bowl has been some sort of a camp preview, but maybe we'll just condense it all into one, like a bouillabaisse or something, and just put it all back out there, and then you can let it stew and whatever you do with that stuff. I don't really cook a lot, but getting back to Chicago, Tom, Ryan Day was asked, and this is how we'll start the show. Ryan Day was asked about his biggest questions heading into camp. And I don't think we will disagree with any of these because they are very significant. Obviously, the first was quarterbacks. The second, just how he said, will the defense be good? And I thought, well, that's very honest, because it's very open and honest that he has this question as well. He expects the defense to be good, but it's still a question mark until you see it. And then the third would be, can we run the ball? And that would entail JK being better, the offensive line being better. So these are the three biggest questions heading into camp, and I don't know that I would disagree with any of those. The quarterback thing that I wanted to talk first about, the process of getting Justin Fields ready. And one of the things that Ryan Day talked about was they create, because they can't work with him directly in the summer, they can tell him what they want him to do, and then he would go do it. They create, I think Day said, teach tapes. So it had me, I'm imagining like they have him watching like Tom Amansky videos on how to be a quarterback. And you've got Fred McGriff out there, teaching like progressions and dropping back. And obviously you would rather have hands-on. But Tom, is there some value in having, you're looking for a new starter, and this new starter, Justin Fields, is being forced to become this or get ready to become this on his own? He's got these teach tapes, and they talk to him before he goes out and works. Is there maybe some hidden value in that? Because not only does he has to do it on his own or with his teammates, but you have to have that initiative and that drive to get this done on your own, even though there's tons of pressure, but you still have to go out and do it. So is there some hidden value there that maybe you wouldn't get if you're just practicing with 110 other people?
Sure. I mean, you're probably going to learn a lot more about him and how quickly he can sort of assimilate the information and how well he can put that information into practice. You're probably going to learn a decent amount about him and his learning curve having to do it this way. There's probably some question as to how silly it is that the NCAA puts these kinds of restrictions on it, where it's like, okay, well, we know you're going to have to go out there and be practicing 20 hours a week, but these 10 coaches can't be out there with you because otherwise it would really be interfering with your schoolwork. Like it's some pretty classic NCAA eyewash, but working within the rules, they can kind of walk him. They can walk him to the edge of the swimming pool, but then when he jumps in, he has to, they have to walk away and he has to swim on his own. So, it's fine. This is how the rules have been for a long time, and they have a lot of very cool tools that they have that they can use. I mean, they've talked about like virtual reality helmets and that kind of stuff that can help him learn and help him figure out the offense and working against defenses and all that kind of stuff. In a way that you couldn't do 10 years ago, 5 years ago, probably. So they have all sorts of tools to make that time as productive as it can be. So, but yeah, I mean, in general, sure. I mean, that's, if you kind of have to, if they're going to throw you into the pool, that's a good way to figure out what kind of swimmer you are. And they can't be there to correct you. So they've just got to see how he and Gunnar Hoke and the rest of those guys can do without them there.
One of the interesting things about this is that they put in these limitations because coaches would coach, 24/7 every week of the season if they could, and they want to give players a break, so they limit what they can do. But then you're talking about all of these extra things that they do. All the players have iPads, virtual reality. It was about, 13, 14 years ago when the NCAA limited the number of pages you could have in your media guide because it was unfair for some programs to have bigger media guides than others. And now you fast forward to today where I don't expect that Buffalo has all of the equipment that Ohio State has to get their quarterbacks ready in the summer. And I think that's all of this spending done so that they don't practice as much has created maybe even more of a discrepancy between the haves and have-nots. But, Tom, as long as the players are being protected, I guess it's all worth it. But, once they went to that Power 5 thing, the chasm between the two just continues to grow. And you think of what is being provided to these players. Every single player, every single position group has their own specific thing. And I don't really have a larger point to this, but it's amazing the lengths that the schools will go to during players' time off to get them better, to get them to be ready for the season. It's 12 months a year.
Well, if you actually only worked the hours that the NCAA says your coaches are allowed to work with you, and you didn't come in and do extra film study, and you didn't come in and lift weights or do extra throwing during the summer, you would not be a very good college football player. That's just it's one of those things where the NCAA kind of has these rules for this is how many hours you can do this, and student athletes, they have a big thing where it's like 20 hours a week of athletics on top of your schoolwork. And it's like, yeah, there is no college football player that is doing, that is in that building for 20 hours a week. That's just, it is something that the NCAA puts forth so that it's, they have the work-life balance thing going that they can say, oh, look, you can be a regular college student and also just play sports every once in a while. But it just doesn't reflect the reality on the ground of what a student athlete's life is like playing high level Division I college football. They follow the rules. They're not out throwing in front of their coaches and all that kind of stuff this time of year, but the rules are there, and then everyone just goes, okay, well, we will make sure these 10 unapproved people are not out working with them at this time, and then they go do the stuff that the rules don't specifically outlaw, so therefore you can do them. So then they just go do that stuff, and it's still a huge time commitment, and that is what is required of players to play at this level.
I just imagine coaches watching on closed circuit television with CBs, clicking back and forth to whichever strength coaches are out on the field, breaker, we need Justin Fields to do 15 of these drop backs. Breaker, come back. And I don't know if the kids today know what CBs are, but, go watch a movie from the 70s. Go watch Over the Top from the 80s. Go watch some Dukes of Hazzard. I think that's all just good cultural advice anyway. Tom, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to look up some old-timey names, and that annoys me. I ran out of time. Dang it.
That's all right. It's okay. Well, the off season's almost over, so really we're pretty much out of old-timey name season. So good. Hooray. We're done with that.
Let's move to the defense where Ryan Day is. One of the questions is the defense going to be good? And to me, that's open and honest. And he has talked about why, last week he's like, well, we have all of these good players. I don't know that any team in the nation has any better players than we do, but you still don't know if it's going to be a good defense. And I wonder, is this entirely because of last year, or is this just a normal coach paranoia? Where last year you figure you're going to have a good defense, and you see that you do not have a good defense. In fact, you have a bad defense. And how can this be when we have all of this talent? You got 5-star guys that can't even see the field because there's too many guys in front of them, and yet they can't tackle, they can't take proper angles, they can't cover. I wonder if it just turns you gun shy until you can see that, yes, a good defense is possible. You can believe again. You can have hope again. You can open your heart to the possibilities that you can have a good defense. And so, Tom, is it just typical coach concern? And that's his job, is to be concerned. And that's something that Urban Meyer told me. Like, my job is to be concerned about everything. But is there also the fact that last year happened, and I really don't want that to happen this year?
A lot of times it probably is paranoia. In this case, no, that's not paranoia. That is, they were terrible last year, and now you've got new coaches, like almost entirely new coaching staff, and you've got a new scheme, and you've got some turnover personnel-wise. And, even if it looks good at this time of year, even if they were happy with how it looked in the spring, the defense is always kind of ahead of the offense during the spring. That's just kind of how it is. So even if it looks good, what does that really mean? I think that they will be probably concerned until the defense really goes out there and gets through September, gets through some of those early tests. Do they go to Nebraska and shut down Nebraska in Lincoln? Like, at that point, yeah, they might start feeling pretty good about the defense if they really do that. But that hasn't happened yet. And you have so many changes. You get so many new faces. You've got, like I said, the new scheme. There's just a lot of question marks right now this time of year. And until they go out, until they see it on the field, until they see it during a game, you can't feel too confident. Because even if they shut them down all August, does that mean the offense is bad or the defense is good? That's the timeless issue of fans leaving the spring game going, well, everything that was good was also bad. And you can kind of tell sometimes, and you can get a sense for what, whether it really is good defense or bad offense. But until you really see it on the field and see it in action, yeah, I think it's entirely reasonable for them to be a little bit concerned.
I saw on Twitter a couple of former Buckeyes talking about Urban Meyer that if the defense had a great practice, he would be really mad and basically blame it on the offense. And so when we look at Ryan Day's third big question of can you run the ball, and you're talking like is it bad offense, is it good defense? Like, I wonder, I don't know if we asked, like, was the Ohio State offense able to run the ball on the Ohio State defense last year, like in practice? Were they successful? You have to assume that they kind of were. And so then this year, if they don't run the ball well, and we know, like you said, sometimes defenses, it's tough to run the ball in practice because For one, you kind of know when it's coming a lot of the time. Other times, offensive lines are split up or you're not playing everybody. But so if they can't run the ball this year, then we get back to if they can't run the ball in practice, I'm saying, then maybe that gives Ryan Day a little bit of confidence in his defense, but then it's then his concern about the running game goes up. Like if you've got both concerns, you got the running game concern in your left hand, and you've got the defense concern in your right hand. If the running game is doing well against that defense, now the concern for the defense gets greater, and it has to be so frustrating as a coach to like have these issues. But then you go and grade, and you kind of figure out why things are happening and who's playing well in practice and who isn't, because that's how you build your depth chart. But if they can't run the ball well in camp, I don't know that that's a great thing, considering the offensive line, the quarterback, your veteran running back, J.K. Dobbins, or maybe Tom. I'll leave it up to you. Maybe it's the best thing, because now you've got an offense that we expect to be fantastic being contained by a defense that should be good, but we don't know.
Right. I mean, there's certainly some question as, you're breaking in a new starter at right tackle. That person may be lining up against, say, Chase Young at practice. If that person does not win a lot of reps, that doesn't necessarily mean they're terrible. It could just mean that Chase Young's pretty good, because I don't want to spoil anything, but Chase Young's pretty good. So you will probably not completely know what you're going to get until they kick that ball off against Florida Atlantic on August 31st. I mean, that's just, you're going to have some unanswered questions. Unless you have, that offensive line comes out and dominates that defensive line, which you kind of know what you're getting out of the defensive line, and the defensive line's going to be pretty good. If the offensive line comes out and really dominates, they probably have to feel pretty good about that, because Chase Young has not fallen off the face of the earth. Chase Young is going to have a good year. And so I don't expect them to do that, but if they do, then they probably have to feel pretty good about that. But it's just, I don't know if they're really going to know for sure what they have until the season starts, and then maybe even a few weeks in. Although last year, if you look at that Oregon State game, you had a pretty good sense what that team was by the end of that Oregon State game, because the offense hung 77 on Oregon State, and then the defense had a few like, oh, that wasn't good, and this is not a very good opponent. So you're probably going to have a decent sense by the end of that Florida Atlantic game at the latest.
Yeah, and then you kind of try to maybe justify like, well, it's just a one game, it's first game jitters, and they'll get these things worked out. And then maybe Rutgers is the second game provides some false conclusions, like, see, told you. And then of course you get to TCU, and there goes 93 yards later and 52 yards later and what have you. On Tuesday, I wrote about Ryan Day wanting a linebacker rotation on the field, wanting more linebackers, wanting Baron Browning out there, wanting Taraja Mitchell, Dallas Gant, Kayvon Pope, Pete Werner, and Tuff Borland will obviously be out there. Malik Harrison will be out there. So I wrote that, and then got some responses, the comments in the piece, and then on Twitter and probably on the forum as well, where Buckeye fans are like, I'm not interested in more linebackers playing. I'm interested in the best linebackers playing. And if it's only two, if it's only three, those are the guys that need to be out there. And you think about it, there's going to be times where it is only two linebackers because of the bullet. And I don't know, Tom, I'm interested in your thoughts. Like, I think rotating is fine. It works at corner. It works at defensive end. But it only works because the drop-off, there isn't much of a drop-off, if any. And that's why you didn't see freshman defensive ends playing a bunch last year, other than, like Tyreek Smith and Tyler Friday played, but you didn't see Javonte Jean-Baptiste. You didn't see Alex Williams. Or in 2017, it wasn't, you didn't see as much of like Chase Young and Jonathan Cooper later in the season because they weren't ready. They weren't good enough. So if all of these linebackers are evenly matched, I think you should see more of them. But I completely understand why Buckeye fans just want consistency. And if that's 2 guys, if that's 3 guys, don't push it.
You used a cooking analogy earlier in the show, and Ohio State's defense basically set the kitchen on fire last year. So I think Ohio State fans probably at this point would be just make some plain Kraft mac and cheese, and that'll be great. As long as everything's not on fire at the end of the meal, like, they would take that. If Ohio State, like you said, gets to the point where they're comfortable enough with a rotation of guys, that's a tremendous sign, because that means that they have a number of guys who they feel are capable of playing at the level they need to play in order to get to where they want to get to. I don't know that they had that last year. I think there's a decent chance that you probably would feel that they did not have that last year. But if they can get to that point this year, that would be a good thing, because A, it means that you have players who are playing at that level that you need to, and B, you keep those guys fresh. And the other thing is, you could use those guys situationally too. You know, if you're rotating your linebacker situationally and say Tough Borland is someone that you feel is a better Mike in running situations, and Taraja Mitchell's a better Mike in a situation where they might be going more sideline to sideline, then rotating those guys in and out, you can maybe take advantage of some of their individual, skill sets in a way that rather than just having one guy play and you just kind of ride and die with him, regardless of what the opponent is trying to do. So there are some reasons that I think that would be, if they can get to the point where they're comfortable with multiple guys and a decently deep rotation, that would be a really good sign for this defense. I don't think they're there yet. I think that linebacker is probably a little bit like, we talked last week about quarterback, where they haven't named a starter at quarterback because they don't feel like anyone is completely at the level they need to be yet. And linebacker's probably kind of in that same spot where there's a little bit of show me, there's a little bit of, hey, there's a new linebackers coach and there's a new scheme, and they want to see a little more from some of these guys and sort of sort out who fits where and who can do what best. But if they get to the point where they're comfortable with multiple guys playing and they can get into a rotation of some sort, that would probably be a pretty good sign for this defense this fall.
Mm-hmm. And to be able to specialize it, like Tough Borland was great against Army, maybe not so great against Baker Mayfield, and where you could see him being more useful against Wisconsin than Cincinnati or a spread team, or better against Michigan State, or not Michigan anymore, because we know they're up-tempo and they're spread and they're modern. But there are opportunities for all of these guys. Now, you're talking about, we're keeping this with the cooking analogies. As you were saying that, I'm imagining a TV show where Gordon Ramsay is like on the sidelines with coaches, and as things are going bad, he's like, I'm yelling at them, like grabbing Bill Davis and saying, you donkey, what are you doing? This isn't a blitz. This isn't this. This isn't that. And just getting really angry at the Ohio State defensive staff last year. I think that would be an entertaining show. You've got Gordon Ramsay can do a lot of things. I don't know if he knows much about American football, but from what I saw, you don't need to, and you can coach it at the highest levels. Now that's an unwarranted shot on my part, and maybe that's a little mean and uncalled for and inaccurate, but you know what? I did it. I own it. And Tom, you don't have to delete that or edit that out. Just don't let Bill Davis know I said it, okay?
I think it was completely unfair because, unless I'm mistaken, I don't believe Gordon Ramsay was in Urban Meyer's wedding, so I don't think he was qualified at all to coach on the staff last year.
I'm trying to drink water, man. So we'll move around here on the defense. Jordan Fuller doesn't really know where he's going to play. We talked to him at Big Ten Media Days. He does expect to start out at free safety, which is the deep safety, which is where we have kind of pegged him all along, because that's the best fit, because that allows you to put Shaun Wade at strong safety in the slot. And we both agree that the more he's on the field, the better. And Jordan Fuller, I still think he played better in 2017 as the deep safety, replacing Malik Hooker, than he did last year, where he was more of the slot safety. That, he's a bigger guy. That slot guy has to be quick, and he's 6'2", 205. So I think he's more suited for that deep safety, where he's also a very sound tackler and can come down and crash and not be out of control. So I think that's a positive thing, and they're moving in the right direction. But when we also talked to him, or when I talked to him, he was saying, I want to see Josh Proctor out there. I want to see Isaiah Pryor out there. Like, I will give up snaps so that those guys can get out there because of how well they're playing. And that's what you want from a captain. But having him at center field time, I think, is the best thing for the defense.
If you go back to 2017 when he was at that free safety spot, I think if you think back, you're going to remember a lot of times that you heard people say stuff like Jordan Fuller with the touchdown saving tackle. It feels like he had, one or two. Just thinking back, I think he had like one or two against Nebraska. Maybe he might have had one against Rutgers. It just seems like he was, it was one of those, the announcer says one man to beat, and then that man didn't get beat because it was Jordan Fuller, because he's a short tackler and does a pretty good job at that center field spot. And when he wasn't at free safety last year, there was a lot of watching the backs of other safeties chasing KJ Hamler down the field, or Kevontae Turpin down the field, or whoever it was in any given game. There were a lot of 70, 80, 90-yard touchdowns they gave up last year. And if you look at Shaun Wade's skill set, which is he's got he has a background as a coverage guy, it makes a ton of sense to put him in that strong safety spot, put him over the slot receiver where he's going to be in coverage more, and let Jordan Fuller be that center field guy at the free safety spot and do what he does best. Keep it in front of him, crash hard when he needs to, but be able to break down, take good angles, and be a sure tackler. That seems like that's the spot that makes perfect sense for him. And I know I didn't talk to him, but I read through the transcript of what he said. It seemed like it was kind of like, well, we'll work at both positions, and I'll be ready to go wherever. But it sure seems like it would make a lot of sense for him to be at that free safety spot.
Yeah, and then as long as you're keeping Shaun Wade in that man coverage, that would allow him to slide over to corner next year pretty seamlessly and take that next step. When I'm looking at all of this depth, Tom, the depth at running back, which is very good but unproven, the depth at receiver, which is very good, some of it, maybe the best of it, is yet to come. Tight ends, never deeper. Offensive line, we've mentioned maybe 7-8 guys could play. Defensive line is, talking to Jonathan Cooper, he said defensive ends are comparable in depth to where they were when he was a sophomore, when you had the 4 Hubbard and Holmes and Lewis and Bosa playing. They're not there talent-wise, but the depth is there. Defensive tackle, there's 8 guys that could play. The linebackers we've already talked about. Corners are still an issue. Safeties, there's a bunch. It might be position by position as deep a team as Ohio State has ever had, but so much of it is unproven, including the quarterback situation, which makes the ceiling for the Buckeyes and the floor pretty wide. I think we would agree ceiling is 15-0 because you have a lot of talent. You can win every game because there aren't that many teams that are so much better than you that you don't have a shot. But when you look at the ceiling or the floor, the basement of this team, and you look at the schedule, I see, say, 8 games that aren't automatic wins. And if they're not automatic wins, then that means they could be losses if some of that depth that we talked about doesn't progress as it should. And if there's, I don't know, would you agree with that? 8 sure things like Cincinnati at Indiana, at Nebraska, Michigan State at home, at Northwestern, Wisconsin at home, and then Penn State and Michigan. I don't think Maryland's going to come here and beat Ohio State. So not that they couldn't, but it's not as realistic as the other 8 games. And if you're talking about 8 games that aren't sure things, how many of those are losable this season if things don't come together? If those concerns that Ryan Day has all come to fruition, and this is like a worst case scenario, where do you see the floor being, and how realistic is it that they fall there?
The worst case scenario probably involves an injury at quarterback and some uncertainty on the offensive line not gelling and the defense just not coming together. And if you have all of that stuff, especially the injury at quarterback, like that's where you can get into an 8-4. I think that's I don't think that's very likely that they'll get to 8-4, but there's like a scenario where that happens that doesn't involve, the entire team getting mono or something. Like you could have a somewhat realistic scenario that you have a couple injuries in the wrong spots and just some stuff doesn't come together and it ends up 8-4. That would be pretty cataclysmic, but you could see that happening. I don't know that I would put at Indiana in the losable column. I would say Florida Atlantic, at Indiana, Miami, Maryland, and Rutgers. I'd say those 5 are probably pretty much you're going to win. Assuming the buses don't get lost on the way to the stadium, those are probably 5 wins.
And they could get stabbed at Rutgers.
They could. Someone gets hair gel in their eyes. You don't know, but yeah, I mean there are certainly the schedule is not overly friendly this year. Cincinnati is a plausibly losable game. That is, I think people will look at an in-state opponent and go, it's fine. Like they'll beat that. They don't lose to in-state teams, but Cincinnati won 11 games last year and is returning a pretty good number of players this year, and you know that that's going to be circled on their schedule and has been for probably years. At Nebraska, we've talked about as a huge trap game for a long time. Michigan State is, who knows with Michigan State. Northwestern, it's a Friday night game. Wisconsin at home, they should win. And then you finish with that idiotic Penn State and at Michigan. I meant to ask Jim Delaney last week, like, what are you guys doing with the scheduling? Like, what is wrong with you people? And as soon as he got off the stage, I went, oh crap, I meant to ask him about that. I just completely forgot about it when we were there. So that's on me. But yeah, the Big Ten has not done them any favors with this schedule. But yeah, I would say 8-4 is about the floor.
And I think like if there's a quarterback injury, they would be forgiven for that. Yeah, that's an 8-4 team. But also, a lot of there's a lot of reason for optimism. Are they Michigan? No, clearly not. We're not talking about a Big Ten favorite or a playoff favorite. We're not. Let's realize your place, Ohio State fans. You're probably going to be pretty good, but let's make sure you realize you are not Big Ten consensus favorite Michigan. So just realize that. And that way, if the unthinkable happens and you do win the Big Ten over Michigan, then you can celebrate. But don't get your hopes up, because I personally have seen the magazines, I have seen the TV shows, I heard the radio shows, and it's going to be a pretty good year for the Michigan Wolverines. Tom, did you know that?
That'll do it for this week's episode of ESPN's FEI podcast. Thanks for listening. Honestly, what are the odds that Michigan would come into the Ohio State game with, a very strong team, statistically very strong team, a clear path to the league championship, and then blow it in some kind of like hilarious fashion? What are the odds that happens? Like Can you ever remember that kind of thing happening? I sure can.
Very, very slim chance of that happening. And when I say slim, I'm saying it with quotation marks. But you can't see that.
So like a 39 to 62% chance, you'd think?
In that window.
Like that?
Somewhere in there.
In that window? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That right in that sweet spot, as our fearless athletic director would say. Tom, let's move to old man Pat Fitzgerald. And he had some recent comments about like the state of society today, and basically where kids today aren't going to games because they can't tear themselves away from their phones, and a lot of things are affected by the way they're just staring at their phones. And said he went out on a date night and him and his wife were actually looking face to face, and he looked around and there's like a double date going on with all four people staring at their phones. Now, personally, when my wife and I are out, I don't get on my phone until she does. That is a signal that it is okay for me to get on my phone. But as it relates to attendance, I think it is a cause, but not phones. Like technology, it's the television product is so much better than it ever was when we were watching on our 27-inch console standard definition. I mean, we didn't even know what standard definition was. And that was fine, but it wasn't as good as going to the game. Now it's very comparably entertaining. Plus, it's a hell of a lot cheaper. And I think that's really the cause of all this. It's so much more expensive to go. And yeah, it sucks that I can't get on my phone. I can't send texts from the press box, but if you're asking just regular people to go and fork over $150 for Maryland or Michigan State, and then $20 to park 20 minutes away, and then deal with everything you have to deal with, it's not even close to the value. You can't even call it a value. It doesn't outweigh the fun of staying home,
Well, I've heard a lot of people talk about how it can't compete with TV, and in a lot of ways that's true. But what you're seeing, I think, is a kind of the long-term result of decisions that have been made kind of on a big scale in the sport, where a decade or so ago, athletic departments and university presidents and college conference commissioners decided the most important thing that we are going to prioritize is maximizing our revenue and maximizing our TV dollars. And they have designed the game around TV and maximizing TV revenue. And that's great. They have made a crap load of money on TV revenue. And they all have wonderful, shiny locker rooms, but they've done that at the expense of the in-game experience. And so you've got games that are going 4 hours now, and you've got these long breaks in the middle of the games. It just kills the atmosphere because they have to cram all these TV commercials in so they can pay for all of the expensive TV deals they've signed. That kills the atmosphere during, in the stadium. They've prioritized TV over that in-stadium atmosphere, but they also haven't cut the prices of the football tickets. Like, it's not cheaper to go to a football game now because the experience is not as good as it is on TV. It's still extremely expensive. What is the Wisconsin ticket this year? $170 or something like that?
Yeah.
And Wisconsin's fine. Wisconsin's a perfectly respectable team, but they're a 9-3 cross division game, and they're fine. Like that's not worth. If I wanted to take my family to that game, that's 170 times 4. Okay. Plus parking, plus food, plus, I mean, you are easily, you could be pushing $800 there without having, without doing anything extravagant. That's a crazy amount of money. And that's So the answer is, okay, don't take your family to the Wisconsin game. Okay, well, I'll take them to the Miami of Ohio game and watch them be up 52-6 on Miami at halftime. And those tickets are probably, what, $60, $70, something like that. So, that's a $350 day. And you're sitting and it's hot, and it's still a 3.5 or 4 hour game because they've still prioritized TV over that. And it's like, well, you made your choice a while ago, and you decided TV money was the most important thing, and maximizing revenue on tickets is the most important thing, and that's fine, and that pays for lots of other sports, but the result of that is the in-stadium experience kind of stinks in some ways, and it's real expensive, and so people just aren't going to go. But, phones too.
And even at Ohio State, where in 2017 and 2016, on average, they were at 102% of capacity. Last year, they were at 97% of capacity, and we're only over capacity, or only reached capacity once all year, and that was obviously for the Michigan game. The Rutgers game last year, 93,000. So it's like 12,000 under the stated capacity of 104,944. And that was the first time they were under 100,000 since 2002. And yes, they had some renovations last year, so the seating was limited. But you're talking about a situation where there are empty seats every game. For Michigan, you can see empty seats in the corners of south stands. The season tickets were on sale. I think you might still be able to buy them now. Day of game or single game tickets are on sale. Like, I don't ever remember season tickets being on sale to the public. And back in the day, and that being 5, 10 years ago, 3 years ago, you would have to, and beyond and past that, you would have to basically donate money for the right to buy season tickets. And that's like now a thing of the past. And everything is just so much more expensive. And if it's easier, cheaper to get stuff on the secondary market, then you can do that. Or if, you know what, I don't want to pay $1,400 for a season ticket that has 3 premium games, I'd rather just spend $170 on each of those games and save some money and not have to, like you said, Tom, sit through a 52-6 Miami game when I can do that at home and then also see how the Oklahoma game is doing and what's going on with Clemson, and utilize the amount of money that I've spent on my cable and my television and just watching and experiencing the fun Saturday afternoons. So there are a lot of reasons why people aren't going to games as much anymore, but there'd be fewer reasons if it was cheaper.
You can take your kids to the spring game, and it's a lot of fun, and it's basically the functional equivalent competitively of a Miami of Ohio game, and it's $5 to get in or whatever it is, and you stay for halftime, and it's great, and then you leave, and everyone has a good day, and it's a lot of fun. But if you can't charge people $70 a ticket or $60 a ticket for the spring game because no one would go. And you're seeing the kind of leading edge indicator where I would not be surprised if there was a game or two where they were under 100,000 again this year. But this becomes a snowball effect where if this is kind of how it goes for a period of years, then people get out of the habit of going to games. Like, I think a lot of people go to the games because we go to the games every year, and that's what we do. And once people start getting out of that habit, it's real easy to just not do that anymore. And there are lots of negative impacts of deciding that TV revenue is the number one thing you had to focus on. And this is where what we want to do. The in-stadium experience one. Having Rutgers in the Big Ten is one. And I mean, people were talking about Jim Delaney's legacy this week and last week, and as he was kind of doing his last State of the Big Ten kind of address at the Big Ten Media Days. And if you want to buff up the Jim Delaney statue that you want to build in front of the Big Ten headquarters for how much money he's made. This is part of the legacy too, that the money is great. And, boy, howdy, is everyone's locker room super fancy looking, but you're doing this at the expense of some long-term stuff that will not be Jim Delaney's problem when the bill comes due, but the trends are not great on a lot of that stuff, and someone's gonna have to fix that or make some pretty significant changes at some point, or the trends are gonna those trend lines are gonna start getting a little steeper.
A few years back when Ohio State went to this tiered pricing that a lot of schools had done before them, I think the thinking was that Gene Smith would be okay with less than capacity because you're still making more money. And then the question becomes, at what point do you have to really reduce prices? And it's not, and reducing prices doesn't mean increasing them by less than you did a year ago, or by, at what point is it 90% where you're like, well, okay, we need to get people back in the stadium, so prices have to come down. And, they've got the math and at what point they'd have to make that move. And they're not there yet, but the trend would seem like, well, you're going to get there eventually. And what is that price point where they're like, well, we got to go back down? In 3 years, that might be when they decide to do it, and they would just be taking it back to today's prices, which really doesn't do anything, So you wonder, like, are the days of 106,000 a game, are those gone because you can't necessarily make it attractive enough money-wise or price-wise? And the in-stadium experience, like you said, with the constant breaks, I think doing what soccer does or doing what hockey does, where there's not as many breaks and you have like in-game commercials. I think if you do that, that makes the in-stadium experience so much better. Where you're, the timeouts after kickoffs and the timeouts after this and that, where you can keep the game moving, that makes it a better experience in stadium. Also makes it a better television product. And Tom, you're also able to get the 3.5 hour windows in, which is significant considering, you want to show games at noon, you want to show games at 3:30, you want to show games at 7, you want to show games at 10:30. One way to make this happen is to have fewer breaks. And I know they've talked about doing some things here and there, but that would seem to be a reasonable solution, that whether it's in-game reads for the play-by-play or it's just shrinking down, while after a punt, when, the special teams is leaving the field, the offense is coming out, you've got at least 30 seconds there that you can show a commercial while not leaving the game. And you don't need to go 2.5 minutes, and find ways to make this a better product. But as long as it's making money for the TV, like, because you said, it's the TV product, it's the TV networks. As long as they're happy, screw the fans is how it feels. And not just how it feels, how it is.
Yeah, at some point, someone has to prioritize something over making the most possible money. And making the most possible money is like that's fine. That can be your goal, but that is at odds with some of the other things that you say are your goals, which are clearly not the number one goal. I mean, you can have your goal be to maximize the revenue you make on game tickets, or you could be your goal can be to fill the stadium at the highest possible price that you can fill the stadium at. And they have chosen to maximize the revenue, and that's a perfectly reasonable decision to make. I mean, that is a normal business decision to make. That's not like they're doing anything crazy, but you have to recognize that at some point that is going to catch up with you, and it is starting to catch up with them. And there are some long-term concerns there that I don't know if they're being thought about. This is I'm going to just kind of go to the easy, obvious example of a terribly run sports organization and cite the Mets right now. The Mets have had a terrible season, awful, terrible season. They are currently offering, they have tickets for their upcoming homestand that they are offering at 84% off of face value to get more fans in the stadium because they're drawing terribly right now because they're having a bad season. that's fine, except you have all these people who have bought season tickets who have paid 100% of their face value for their season tickets. And now, not only are the people who are sitting next to them paying 84% less than them, but if they want to sell them, they basically can't even give them away because the team is essentially giving them away. So now, how many of those fans next year are not going to buy season tickets because it's like, well, that's stupid. They're just going to sell them cheaply if they have an even halfway not good season. So I'm not going to buy a full season package. Maybe I'll buy a 20 game package or something like that. I know people who have Ohio State season tickets who have trouble giving games away because it's like, it's just, I can't give away my Miami tickets because it's a pain to go down there and it's a pain, and it's not going to be a competitive game and all that. And at some point, those season ticket holders stop buying. And I mean, you're seeing that. You mentioned the people who had to pay to have the right to buy season tickets. That's the Buckeye Club. And I'm sure you need to pay to get good season tickets, but all of a sudden now you can get season tickets without having to be a member of the Buckeye Club. And so they have made all these choices to maximize this revenue in other places, but now all of a sudden you're not getting as much Buckeye Club revenue probably as you did before because now people don't have to make a donation to buy season tickets anymore. So there's, this is sort of a long, slow creeping process that's been coming for a while, and you're just sort of starting to see it a little more in more obvious ways now. But something is going to have to change at some point, or the trend is going to continue in a very negative direction on a lot of this stuff.
And it's funny, it's like the sport has never been healthier, but this trajectory can only go so far before it, starts to go the other way. And then what kind of momentum does it have coming down? And is there something to stop it before it's like a rocket going up, like one of those water pressure rockets goes up and then it comes crashing down? Is I think things are healthy enough to keep it from crashing, but they need to understand that it's not going to continue going up.
It's not going to crash at Ohio State. You are not going to have 50,000 fans in the stands at Ohio State. Ohio State is still going to, even if Ohio State, if it really craters at Ohio State, you're going to have 90,000 fans in the stands for any kind of a decent game, and probably 85,000 for the crappy games. But there are lots of places that do not have the fan base, the support that Ohio State does. I mean, you go through the MAC. Look at the MAC. I think the majority of the MAC is below what the NCAA requires in terms of per game average attendance, and that's partly a function of the MAC has kind of sold its soul to be part on that midweek ESPN, the Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night MAC games in all of November. And that's great. You're on TV, but there's 6,000 people in the stands. So this is not specifically an Ohio State thing. This is a kind of sport-wide issue. But it's going to, you're going to see that water pressure rocket drop a lot faster in a lot of other places than Ohio State, but it's happening everywhere to some degree or another.
Well, and I'm just looking at my Phil Steele magazine right here, and just for some reference, like Central Michigan, 1-11 last year, they were at 42.4% capacity for a stadium that holds 30,000. Ball State was at 45% for a stadium that holds 22,000. Even Ohio was at like 67% capacity last year for a stadium that holds 24,000. So you're right. It's the smaller schools that are going to take the biggest hits and try to figure out a way. And the MAC goes with the TV product and tries to make as much money from that because there's more money to be made there from a 22,000 seat stadium that might have 15,000 people in it. So it's just a terrible time to be in college football. There's no money being made, hand to mouth, everybody. Coaches are only making millions. Players are only getting to, study VR helmets during the summer. And so you wonder why anybody even does it. So we got some recruiting news coming up, and then we'll get to listener questions. Court Williams, the California linebacker, is committing on Wednesday, may have already committed by the time you listen to this if you listen to it in the afternoon, which you shouldn't. You should listen to it on the way to work or to wherever you do in the morning. Wake up with us. Who wouldn't want to do that? But Court Williams announces his commitment. 24/7 says 2 p.m. tomorrow. He's the number 12 outside linebacker in the nation from California Power, St. John Bosco. Expected to be a Buckeye, could be a bullet for the Buckeyes. His crystal ball is, I think, 6 projections for Ohio State and 2 for UCLA. And if they lose him to UCLA, then, you shouldn't lose anything to UCLA right now. As good as Chip Kelly is, I think that some California players need to see some proof before they start flooding his way. So he should be a Buckeye tomorrow afternoon. Next week, actually a week from Wednesday? No, a week from Tuesday, Jalen Knighton is committing, the all-purpose back out of Florida. And then 3 days later, August 2nd, is Bijan Robinson. So there is going to be some action this week, more action next week in preparation or ahead of camp breaking for Ohio State. So, Tom, it's been a couple quiet weeks, but that's coming to an end here this week and next week.
Yeah, I mean, they're already at 21 commits, and the 3 guys you just listed off are all widely expected to be Buckeyes very shortly. So that would bring them to 24, and they will probably take 25, and maybe the kicker Jake Siebert is going to be a gray shirt, so they can kind of take 26. But your class is getting pretty full at that point, and if they bring in all of those guys, I mean, I think at that point, I have not gone through the class calculator, but they are close enough to Clemson and Alabama right now that if they add all 3 of those guys and Clemson and Alabama don't add anyone in the next couple of weeks, there's a decent chance Ohio State is at the top of the class rankings at that point. And to do that with the first-year coach Ryan Day and the year after Urban Meyer is gone, I mean, that's pretty remarkable. And it's amazing the way they've done it, because they've brought in a number of good Ohio players, but they've done a lot of work nationally. They've hit that West Coast pretty hard between Arizona and California. And I mean, there's a lot of guys from all over the country. And that's a pretty good testament to the Ohio State brand and to the Ohio State recruiting staff and the coaching staff that this thing has just kept on rolling the way it has, even after Urban Meyer left.
Yeah, I agree. Ryan Day has saved Ohio State. That's a good point. You want to get to listener questions?
I do, more than anything in the world. First one from @Zadiah. Do you think Ryan Day has a plan for the course of the season? 6 games focusing on defense and running game to ease Fields in, followed by slowly opening up what Fields can do as a passer. This takes advantage of the schedule and the greater depth of the team than is in the rest of the Big Ten. It's
interesting that Zadiah says the first 6 games, because that was something that Ryan Day talked about, where it's almost like 2 seasons where the first 6 games and then you have a bye and then 2 games and then another bye. So they're taking those first 6 games like a mini season where you get everybody up to speed and you get Justin Fields completely into the offense. I don't think it's going to take 6 games before they really start to unleash him. I think it'll happen before that. But yeah, those 6 games is where they, I think, Tom, they come together, they gel, and they get ready for the stretch run, which comes after the bye weeks and ends with, like you said, the Penn State and the Michigan game.
Yeah, I mean, they have a little bit of a luxury to kind of ease themselves into the season a little bit. I mean, we just listed off earlier in the podcast the 4 or 5 sure, more or less sure wins, and 3 of the teams that I listed out of the 5 are 3 of the first 4 games on that schedule. So you can kind of ease yourself in a little bit. And that's kind of a normal thing that you're going to do during the year. You're going to kind of continue to build on what you've worked on early. So I think that there's probably something to that they'll, they don't need Justin Fields to win them a game probably early in the year. I mean, like we said, Cincinnati could be a challenge. That game at Nebraska, I think everyone has circled as a real potential danger spot, and we'll know a whole lot more about the team at the day after that game. But yeah, I think there's something to the idea that they'll probably try and do the, whether you want to call it a little bit of a trestle ball and kind of run the ball and rely on the defense and find out if they can rely on the defense and try and do that and not put Justin Fields in too tough of a spot if they can avoid it early in the season.
It just seems like that's like a foreign concept to me for Ryan Day and Mike Yurcich and even Kevin Wilson to some extent, where you just need your quarterback maybe over those first 6 games, and not that they're easy because like you said, Cincinnati, at Nebraska, Michigan State, where those are tough games. Maybe is Justin Fields good enough, or is the team good enough for where you just don't want Justin Fields to lose the game? So you do your trestle ball, you do take it easy, but that seems so unlike Ryan Day and Mike Yurcich and what they do as quarterback creators and managers, where they're still going to throw the ball. And yeah, I think it'll be dialed back, but I don't expect it to be this closed, confined thing. I think they still realize, like, great offense is something that you don't need to protect yourself from. And in order to get Justin Fields ready, because maybe it's not the first 6 games, even though that's what Ryan Day is talking about, because that's before you get to the bye week. It's those first 4 games where Justin Fields has to get his feet wet and the defense has to set and the offensive line has to gel, because it's game 5 at Nebraska. It's game 6, Michigan State, with their defense and a renewed healthy offense, where you need those first 4 games to get you ready for those 2. And I think Cincinnati's a good test, and you don't want just 4 cupcakes, because then it's not as easy to measure yourself. So I think while we're talking about this 6-game block, the first 4 games are what Justin Fields and everybody will use to get ready for games 5 and 6. And then you get a break. Then you've got Northwestern and Wisconsin. And then you get a break with a bye week, and then Maryland and at Rutgers. So you almost have like 3 bye weeks in a row, Tom, to get prepared for Penn State and Michigan. So I don't know what you're crying about.
I can't remember the last time Maryland gave Ohio State a game. I mean, come on, has it ever happened?
Thank you.
Probably not.
That's what I'm saying.
Probably not. Next one from Buckeye Girl. What is the reasoning behind Jack Miller's ranking on ESPN? And just in case you have not seen it, or in case you have not been paying attention to ESPN's recruiting rankings, good for you. ESPN dropped Jack Miller. Do you remember how many spots? It was 60 something spots or something like that. And Tom Luganbill, who was kind of one of their recruiting staff guys, basically said, no, it's not just because he's hurt. So, Gerd, what do you think is the reasoning behind ESPN's dropping Jack Miller's ranking?
And here's like one thing to understand is Tom Luganbill, I think he's like the director of recruiting for ESPN, and his dad Al is the director of player personnel at Arizona State. So they've seen Jack Miller, at least Al Luganbill has, I'm sure, and the Arizona State staff has seen him, and I'm sure Al has conveyed his thoughts on Jack Miller to his son. I still think that him not being able to participate in the Elite 11 obviously did not help, and it may have been an opportunity to overcome some thoughts that they have about him. But the other thing to remember about ESPN and their recruiting, they are woefully undermanned to be a national network. And they really, until they put more effort and more money towards populating the regions, populating the nation, they did it for a while where they had guys all over the nation. But even then, they had more in the Southeast than they did in the Midwest, and they didn't only had like 1 or 2 out in the West. And you could see, like, in their rankings, why they'd have like so many more Florida guys ranked than guys out west or guys in the Midwest. It's because they had more people looking down south and looking over tape. And now if you go to their website, and I'm looking at their the Ohio State commitment page right now, and every player has bios or bio pages. There are no bios. There's a link for a scouting report. There are no scouting reports. It used to be like they would have their results from the opening. They don't have any of those anymore. They don't. Well, some do, but like if you go to like I'm looking at Julian Fleming right now, number 1 receiver in the nation, number 4 player in their rankings. Like there's no scouting report where it's listed. There are no recent items for this player. They just don't. It's not in them anymore to like keep track, update. You would think, Tom, that they could just get some interns and be like, go check 24/7's profiles because they'll have the times from the openings. They'll have their best times. Just go ahead and do some data entry and update that stuff. And it's not important to them. And this is part of their premium ESPN Plus insider. There is no inside information because there's no information. And so when you think about ESPN's rankings, it's a handful of guys, not even a handful, maybe 3, going over rankings and what they see, what they didn't see, what they don't even know about. Like G. Scott, who 24/7 during the opening was talking about, is he a 5-star guy? He's on the cusp. G. Scott is in ESPN's ranking is the number 33 wide receiver. And if there are 32 wide receivers in this class, based on what we've seen so far, better than G. Scott, this might be the greatest wide receiver class of all time, and which is unlikely. What is more likely is, as Tom Luginbill said, G. Scott consistently times in the 4.7s, even though at the opening, I think in the finals he did a 4.60. I just don't think they can see everybody because they have like 3 guys looking at it.
Well, there's a little bit of this that reminds me of a conversation we had about Stephen A. Smith, like at some point last year when he was talking about Dwayne Haskins being more of a runner than a thrower. And the problem isn't that that Stephen A. Smith can't know everything about every sport. The problem is that Stephen A. Smith is being asked to know everything about every sport and to talk about every sport as if he knows everything about every sport. If you don't have the staff to cover recruiting nationally, you probably shouldn't cover recruiting nationally. That's just because otherwise you set yourself up to the the point where, you've basically said earlier they have at one point their staffing was extremely based in the Southeast, so therefore all the players in the Southeast were rated way high, and the rest of the country was kind of underrepresented in their rankings. And now G. Scott is a borderline 5-star in 24/7, and he's the 33rd wide receiver in ESPN. Like, which one of those do you think, if 24/7 has significantly more staff to do it and to track these things and watch and monitor all these events and all of that, which one would you put more stock into? Like, it seemed like a very odd thing to kind of not only do but then double down on the way he has on Twitter. So. The good news is, in the end, this doesn't actually impact anything. That that wherever they have G. Scott rated, when G. Scott shows up on campus in 2020, that his rating stops mattering at that point. And if you're an Ohio State fan who's worried that is he really not that good, the people who have I think seen him most recently and seen him against high level competition bumped him way up their list. So I wouldn't spend too much time losing sleep over this, but it maybe is a decent indication of what you should and shouldn't pay attention to longer term. And there are going to be times that ESPN may have a guy, an Ohio State player rated higher than 247 does. And, that doesn't mean that at that point ESPN is smart and 247 is wrong. That just means, maybe if you want to believe that ESPN just doesn't have the staff to cover it and doesn't know what they're talking about, then you should kind of believe that consistently, no matter no matter what the results they're putting out might say.
Tom, real quick, since we're talking about recruiting, I was, I think 24/7 has updated their rankings, and the composite is also being updated. Michigan's highest ranked recruit would be Ohio State's fifth highest ranked wide receiver commit in this class. Pretty impressive.
Well, we went through that position by position ranking for Michigan and Ohio State a couple weeks ago, and just kind of where the talent is on those two programs. And I think that it is probably very easy for people to say, well, these guys are from Ohio, so obviously they would be biased towards Ohio State. But this has been several years, not every year, but several years recently. Ohio State has had like 10 players in their class rated higher than any Michigan commit. And that was true, I think, 2 years ago. Last year, Ohio State's class was a little down, but I think it was the 2017 class or the 2018 class. It was like the top 12 recruits between the two programs were all Ohio State players. That adds up. And you're seeing it continue again this year, where, if they keep piling up, let's see, Michigan and Ohio and Penn State combined have 15 4-star recruits. Ohio State has 2 5-stars and 10 4-stars. So, and those are basically the only programs in the conference that have more than a couple 4-star recruits. Like if Ohio State adds Jalen Knighton and Bijan Robinson and Court Williams, Ohio State is going to have as many 4 and 5-star recruits as Michigan and Penn State combined, and probably more than the rest of the Big Ten combined. Like, it's just, the talent gap is just ridiculous. And you have seen that play out on the field, and I think that everyone's kind of in a rush to crown someone other than Ohio State just for the novelty of crowning someone other than Ohio State. But there's no guarantee that Ohio State just keeps winning the Big Ten every year, but it's kind of a smart money bet. Like if you had to bet on someone, you bet on the team that has the most talent, and right now and probably for the foreseeable future, that seems to be Ohio State.
Yeah, if they do get Bijan Robinson, they will have 9 commitments ranked higher than Michigan's top-ranked guy, who is A.J. Henning, wide receiver out of Illinois.
All right, next question from Rick W. Does Coach Day ask his new coaches to stay at least 2 years like Urban required?
Have we asked Brian Day that? I don't recall that being a topic, and I don't know that he's ever talked about it. I thought that was an interesting question that maybe we can address with him when we talk to him next week or next month, I guess, whenever that happens to be, where, do you have that? And it wasn't a requirement. It was a request. It was a desire. But yeah, I'd be interested to know his thoughts. Do you recall, has he talked about that before?
I don't remember hearing him say anything about it one way or the other. And my assumption, I had the same reaction as you. I looked at the question and went, I don't think we've heard anything about that one way or the other. My assumption is that it's probably going to work the same way as it did under Urban. And, I think that was always kind of a handshake agreement. And, if a guy was there 1 year and got offered the head coaching job of Florida State or something, Urban was probably not going to tie them to a chair and keep them from taking it. But I think that's probably, you don't want to be, there is a benefit to staying somewhere a couple of years. You don't want to be the guy who's just hopping from program to program every year either. So I would guess that there's probably some kind of understanding like that in place, but I don't know that for a fact.
Nope.
All right, next one from SoCal. Why does Clemson get so many top defensive line recruits?
This is an easy answer. Tom, when did they put the slide in the football facilities? Was that maybe 4 years ago or so? And
that's, yeah, about that.
Yeah, so you put a slide somewhere and people will come. That's the gist of Field of Dreams. So basically, yeah, you put a slide in there and you can get whatever you want. In terms of, but what they do, and I think they are slated to land maybe 3 of the top 4 defensive linemen in the nation. Actually, the top 3. Jordan Birch he's the number one player in the nation in the 24/7 composite. He's a 62% crystal ball to Clemson. He's out of South Carolina, so he's probably not going to leave the state. Then Brian Bresee, who Ohio State was in on for a while, he's the number 2 guy, the number 1 defensive tackle. He is already committed. And then Miles Murphy, defensive end out of Georgia, is the number 4 player in the nation. He is already committed to Clemson. So why do they go? I mean, just look at the defensive lines they've had over the last few years, Tom. It just becomes this thing that you do, but it helps to have one in state. It helps to have one in the region in Georgia, and then it helps to have one at a state where there is no in-state power, like with Brian Bresee in Maryland, where he's looking at all the top programs in the nation, and there's no huge draw to stay home. So it's almost a perfect storm, but there's also the fact that why wouldn't a defensive line want to play at Clemson when you look at how much fun the guys have had the last few years, and those are guys who are also recruiting for when recruits come in and they talk to these guys, they're letting them know, and they see all of the fun they're having, and they see what it takes, and they want to do that. And you get to Ohio State as DBU, Clemson could be D-line U, and where it starts to become this, not like a self-fulfilling prophecy, but like it just starts to run itself. And there's a little bit of that, but also Dabo Swinney is a tremendous recruiter.
There's that. And I mean, you look at the guys who came in 4 or 5 years ago, they all played. Some of them got to play on offense and in goal line situations, and I'm sure that's a fun, kind of a fun thing. You're throwing touchdown passes to defensive linemen and that kind of stuff, and that's cool. And then they won the national championship, and then they all got drafted in the first or second round of the NFL. Like, yeah, that's pretty much what you're looking for as a high school football player, as a defensive lineman coming out. And I think you could ask the same question, why does Ohio State keep getting 5-star defensive ends? Well, Larry Johnson has a history of taking those players at that level and making them college stars and then getting them drafted real high in the NFL. So yeah, you want to go be the next Joey Bosa or the next Nick Bosa. Yeah, you're going to come to Ohio State. And Clemson has a pretty similar track record recently of churning out some pretty good defensive linemen. So yep, they're gonna go there, and that seems, that seems entirely reasonable. If you're a top defensive lineman, you'd go to kind of one of those programs. And I think it's, if you're say 30 or 35, you're old enough to remember Clemson when Clemson was terrible and Clemson was a punchline. A lot of these, if you're a high school junior right now, Clemson has been good as long as you've really been paying attention to college football in any kind of meaningful way. Clemson has been a national power as long as you've really been paying attention to it. And what Clemson was in 2003 has no bearing on any of these players right now, because they don't remember, and they can all they've seen on TV is a bunch of guys playing well, having fun, winning championships, and getting drafted. So
they don't even remember Clemsoning. And that was 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, it was like 6 years ago. Yeah, exactly. But if you're an 11th grader right now, that you were in 5th grade at that point. So last one from @Dane_Dylan. This sounds like playing devil's advocate. We talk about recruits likely or hopeful to flip to the Buckeyes, but which recruits do you see as the most necessary to keep satisfied, as most likely to flip away from the Bucks? Keep up the good work.
And we were talking about this one a little bit before the show, and the answer is usually the out-of-state kids who maybe have a pull from other major programs, but I don't know that there's really any one guy over the others who would be a possibility. I think you're always going to be concerned about the best guys. Julian Fleming, an hour away from Penn State, you're going to work to keep him committed. For me, I just think there's not necessarily any one particular guy, maybe the guys who are furthest away, like Clark Phillips, but I don't see any of these guys like that. I think it might depend on what happens this season. If, a freshman at a particular position wins a starting job and nobody wants to follow him, or if the defense is bad and Court Williams or Cody Simon or Clark Phillips is like, you know what, I'm not really feeling this. Or, you know what, if one of the local schools completely blows up and, you know, it ends up being like a top 5 or a playoff school where they're like, you know what, I reconsidered, I don't want to be involved with this, because those schools aren't going to stop recruiting the guys in their neck of the woods. So I don't know, Tom, that there's one guy right now. I think it develops over time based on the circumstances of the season for both Ohio State, for the player, and for the other local schools or other major schools still involved.
Yeah, at this point, there's no one that stands out as a, like, oh yeah, it's this guy. This would be someone that you'd be pretty concerned about if you were Ohio State. This time last year, I think we had started hearing about Jordan Battle as a potential flip. He was a defensive back who was committed to Ohio State, and you kept hearing from people like, yeah, it's just he's looking around. It's not, you know, you're not sure. It's kind of uncertain. And then he ended up flipping to Alabama on the day of early signing day. But, I mean, at that point, that was like a foregone conclusion. He was still committed to the class, but it was like a foregone conclusion that he was gone. And there's no one this year that's like that. I think there was a lot of concern around Paris Johnson earlier in the cycle, you know, in the aftermath of Urban Meyer's retirement, where he was kind of taking that tour of Southern schools and doing some very public, you know, posting pictures at Tennessee and Georgia and other places like that. But that has settled down, and it seems like that's pretty much a done deal now. So I don't think there's any one person in particular that you would look at right now. But as you said, if they go 8-4, or if you know, if something really, you know, if something falls out of the sky, or, you know, the season really comes off the rails, then sure, there's always a possibility. But I wouldn't go looking for something to worry about right now, because I don't think there's anything real imminent to be concerned about at this point.
No, I'm with you. I think that's going to do it for the show. Do you have anything else to add before we wrap it up?
No, I don't think so. I was just thinking earlier about all of the things that we said. Oh, that'd be a good off-season show. We should talk about that. And now we have like one off-season show left, so we may have to go 17 hours next week. But right now, I think we're good.
Yes, a marathon show next week. So yeah, thank you everybody for listening. We want to thank you for rating and reviewing us, and continue to encourage you to do that if you haven't. It helps us get seen, get heard by more people, and we appreciate that. It's almost here. Big Ten Media Days is the first step. The next step begins next week with camp opening on Friday. We will maybe be there. You know, we haven't received our schedule yet. That's coming. But so next week we'll do some sort of preview, and then after that, I mean, it's camp time, and it's a good time, and we've got hotel check-in day coming up. We don't know when that is, but it's the most wonderful time of the year, as long as it's not like 102 degrees while we're all sitting around waiting for the dudes to walk into hotels, right?
No, there's nothing that could ruin the ambiance of standing outside a hotel and taking pictures of teenagers as they walk in. That's clearly the highlight of every season.
I do enjoy when, you know, because it's a hotel, so regular people, normies, are also checking in, so they have to walk through this throng of people with cameras and their phones out. Like, you know, who is Mariah Carey staying here? Like, is
the Pope here?
Exactly.
What's going on?
What is going on? And it's like, oh no, football players are checking in, and we take pictures of them and then post them on social media. And then those people look at you like, you are such a sad little man. And
welcome to Columbus. It's just like you've heard.
But there are also people who hang out waiting for autographs, which don't do, because Ohio State doesn't want you to do that. And plus, it annoys me when I don't know.
Are people asking you for autographs?
No, that's what annoys me. Like, oh yeah, just hello, I'm also a person. You know, granted, Justin Fields and oh yes, there goes J.K. Dobbins. Sure, chase them down, but I have feelings. You know, I can write my name. I can sign something. My name will fit on a mini helmet as long as I shorten my last name and just go with like initials. I have feelings. Anyway, thank you all for listening. I have to go cry in a corner now, and we will talk to you guys next week.
Well, she threw away the motel key. I wish it never meant nothing to me. Say you will, now say you will. Oh yeah. Say you will, now say you will. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we could steal a car and leave tonight.